The next generation of BackTrack has arrived. The big surprise? It's no longer called BackTrack. Welcome to Kali Linux. Let's begin. Our objective for you and I in this video are simple. We want to be able to describe what exactly is Kali Linux all about, what are some bells and whistles and features it has, and how do we get it actually installed and up and running on our computer. Let's do a little history lesson in BackTrack. So BackTrack version 1 was developed back and released in 2006 into the wild. And then there's version 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. In fact, BackTrack version 5 was released in 2011. Then we have BackTrack version 5, release 3 was out in 2012. And you might be saying, well, Keith, what exactly does the history lesson in BackTrack have to do with Kali Linux? And the answer is Kali Linux is the next version of BackTrack, except they're dropping the name. So instead of calling it BackTrack version 6, it's simply going to be referred to as Kali Linux. And that announcement happened in March of 2013. So one of the questions for a lot of people is, okay, should I start using it, or is my old BackTrack still good? The reality is, if you're currently using BackTrack version whatever and it's working for you, that's fantastic. If the tools inside of it work for you and they're doing great, there's really no need to change or migrate or update to the new software. However, one of the things that I've noticed with a lot of BackTrack utilities is that they haven't always made it successfully between versions. For example, we go from version 3 of BackTrack to version 4, and some of the tools just stop working. It's terrible. So one of the benefits of this new implementation with Kali is that they're doing a Debian compliant packaging of the tools. Two things that'll give for us. Number one, it'll be easier for people who write tools to recreate packages and actually get them working. And secondly, the tools that we get as users are very likely to work more often than they did in the old BackTrack arena. So the environment as a whole is going to be more successful with the tools that are packaged with Kali Linux. Another benefit that I think is really cool with Kali is that we can customize the installation. Maybe we don't want to use GNOME. Maybe we want to use a KDE. Whatever look and feel you want, you can customize that ISO, and you can actually install from a repository. That could be a local system, or it could be off the web. It won't be as fast off the web, but those are some of the traditional features that we'd have in a enterprise environment if we're rolling out distributions of Linux. Those are all now available in Kali. Another really important benefit is going to be cleaner and smoother upgrades. For example, let's say we're running BackTrack version 4. We'll go back in the time machine a little bit together. So we're running BackTrack version 4. We have our favorite set of tools that we're using, and then there's a new version of BackTrack. So we say, great, we want to upgrade. And unfortunately, some of our tools don't work anymore, and it's pretty much a rewipe of the entire system to implement the new BackTrack. Well, with Kali, when we have major upgrades, that transition theoretically should be a lot smoother, and because everything's Debian compliant, including all the tools and the packaging of those tools, it should make for a better overall experience for you and I, the users of Kali. Now, there will be some people who say, you know what, I'm using BackTrack at the moment. I'm going to keep on using that. It works well. And others are going to be upgrading or start over with Kali. And here's the great news for you and I, is that virtually all of the tools that you and I have been going through in these nuggets together, those tools apply to either distribution. So you haven't lost a thing regardless of which platform you decide to use. Very similar to BackTrack, we can either run Kali from the live CD without installing it to the hard disk, or we can choose to install it to the hard disk and boot and run it from there. So let's walk through a real quick install just to compare and contrast that install to what we experienced with BackTrack. In order for us to install this software, we need to have access to it, and we can download it from this URL right here, www.kali.org. In the downloads folder, we'll select the details regarding what we want to download. Now, at the moment, they only have version 1.0, but we can specify the architecture we're going to run this on, 32-bit, 64-bit, ARM, etc. Windows Manager, at the moment, they currently only have GNOME, but if we wanted to customize an ISO and use KDE or something else, we certainly could. It also has a SHA-1 checksum for us. Now, this checksum can be very handy in the fact that it could validate the integrity of that file. Like, for example, let's just imagine that for whatever reason, we got tricked into going to a wrong site to download it. So we download it, and it's a malicious copy, meaning somebody's made their own distribution. They've added some additional quote-unquote tools, some backdoors into it, and we're about to download it and install it. It'd be good if we knew about that. So what we might want to do before we install this image to our computer We might want to use a separate machine or a separate website just to verify what the actual checksum, what the hash is for that file, and then compare it. Now, there's ways of comparing it based on your platform. On Windows, you can download a tool like this one. I actually downloaded the ISO image already. Here's a free SHA-1 verifier tool that I ran, and here's what I did. I said, okay, here's the file that I downloaded, which it is, and I want to do a SHA-1, and I said, go ahead and calculate the hash. And so it did. And then I copy-pasted this guy right here, and I said, go ahead and compare. And I said, okay, yeah, those two match. And because the hash matches, I know the integrity of that file is intact. So by verifying the hash, either using a third-party tool or the integrated tools inside Linux to go ahead and do that, it just gives you an added level of confidence that you have the right image. Now, just as a heads up, what if we went to this website, but we had our DNS redirected? It's not HTTPS. We had no certificate to validate. If an attacker was advertising this download, the attacker could also modify the checksum. So even if we ran the checksum and it matches, it would be bad information from the actual website we got the image from. So it might be a great idea to verify that checksum out of band or from another computer or another system or another website, just to verify that the hash that Kali.org has specified for that file matches the hash that you have for that file. That would be the proof that you've got the right file and the data integrity is intact. So let's go ahead and do this install. I'm going to do this on a virtual machine because I want to record the entire process. So to do this inside of VirtualBox, I'm going to go ahead and click on New. It's going to say, what do you want to install? I'm going to say some flavor of Linux, and I'm going to say it's just generic Linux. I'm going to scroll down to the bottom and say Other Linux, and then I'll go ahead and give this a name of CBT Kali, just like that. And we'll click on Next. It's going to ask me a few questions like how much memory do you want to give it? I've got plenty of memory on the system. I'm going to give this guy 2 gigs, just like that. And I'm also going to create a new hard drive for it, a new virtual drive. So I'm going to click on Create. It's now saying, okay, what kind of hard drive file do you need? And I'm only going to run this in VirtualBox. I don't need to go between VMware and VirtualBox. So I'm going to say a VDI VirtualBox disk image, click on Next, and I'm going to say dynamically allocate the size. Meaning, let's say I say you can have 20 gigs. It doesn't mean he has to take up the full 20 gigs at the very first moment. He can dynamically grow it up to that size. Sounds good to me. It's a default. I'll click on Next, and it's now asking me how big do I want it. I'm going to specify, I can also just type it here. So I'm just going to type 20 gigs, just like that, and click on Create. So now I've got this brand new virtual machine, but how do we actually link it up with that ISO that I just downloaded? Well, the way we do that is we go to this right click and simply go to Settings. And for storage, we're going to go down to Storage. And here, see how the CD, it says it's empty? We're going to go ahead and we're going to browse for that file, and we're going to go ahead and specify it. This is already in my history because I've already installed this once. I'm going to select the Kali Linux ISO image that we just downloaded. And by selecting the ISO image, now when he boots up, he can go ahead and boot to that device, and we can actually do the install from there. One other thing I'm going to do is I want to also assign, I have that USB external wireless adapter. I want to go ahead and allocate that to this virtual machine. So I'm going to go to USB, make sure that Enable USB 2.0 is clicked, and I'm going to click on Add. And there's a whole bunch of USB devices. I'm going to go ahead and select this guy right here. That is indeed my wireless external USB adapter that I've been using with BackTrack. It's going to work fine also with Kali. Once that's done, I'll click on OK, and we can just bring up this machine by double-clicking on it or by highlighting it and click on the Start button. Either way, it's going to bring up the new virtual machine. Now, from this boot menu, it says, great, you want to run the live CD? We could just press Enter, and it would boot off the CD without any install to the hard disk. Or we can scroll down and simply say, I want to do an install. Now, the graphical install versus an install, it doesn't mean that one's going to get X Windows and the other isn't. The install here is simply going to have a text-based install for all the choices. And then once it's finally installed, you'll have X Windows and all the other graphical user interface benefits that we would typically have as well. So let's go ahead and do the basic text-based install. And it's just going to prompt us for the information it needs as it goes through. So what language do you want to use? Okay, we want to use English because that's my primary language. I happen to be in the United States. Those are defaults. And I want to go ahead and use a key mapping regarding the keyboard of American English, which is the default. We'll press Enter, and it's going to start the install process. So now it's asking, what is your primary network device that you want to use? Is it that wireless network adapter that it sees or the logical Ethernet interface? And I'm going to go ahead and say Ethernet 0. I can use the up or down arrow keys to select that. So Ethernet 0 is going to be my primary connection. Now in this virtualized environment, that Ethernet adapter is bridged to the host machine's primary adapter. So we'll press enter. And it's trying to do IPv6 auto configuration. I don't have an IPv6 active network in place, so that's not going to be too exciting. However, I do have DHCP services running, so it should be able to go ahead and get an IP address. It wants to know what the host name is for this device. I'm going to call it CBT Cali, just like that. I'm going to hit tab. Tab is going to bring the highlight down to here, so now when I press enter, it's going to select continue. So anytime you need to navigate, you just hit the tab, and that will cycle through the various fields. When it's where you want, press enter. It's asking for the domain name, and I'm going to call this cbt.com. Hitting the tab key moves the red highlight to the continue option. I'll press enter there. Now it's asking for a password for root. Now I'm going to use the password of tour just because that's what I have on my BackTrack. You can use anything you want as long as you can remember what it is. So after I've typed in tour to set the password for root, I'm going to hit tab one time, highlights continue, press enter, and now it's asking us to verify that password to make sure we didn't have a typo. So if I thought I typed TOOR and I didn't, I would be in trouble. So I'll type in TOOR one more time, one more tab, one more enter, and now it's asking me about my time zone. And I'm in the Pacific time zone. And now it's asking me, okay, I see 20 gigs out there that I can use for hard disk space. Do you want me to use the entire disk? And I'm going to say yes to that by pressing enter. So I'm just going to confirm that that's the hard disk I'm going to install to. If it is, I'll press enter. And then it says, do you want to split it up? I'm going to take the default of putting all the files in one partition by pressing enter. And then I'm going to specify that I want to finish the partitioning of that hard disk space, that logical hard disk, inside of VirtualBox and continue the install. So here's a little summary. I'm going to hit tab to go over to yes. Are you sure you want to write those changes? Press enter. And the installation continues. So now it's asking us if we want to use a network mirror to go online to get updates if they're available for this installation. So I would say if you're connected already to the internet, I would go ahead and say yes to this. So I'm going to say yes. Is there a proxy server involved? And the answer in my case is no. I've got access from this virtual machine through the host machine through to the internet without using a proxy. So I'm going to hit tab one time, press enter to continue. It's going to go ahead and scan the mirror for updates. And so it's out getting additional updates and packages for this installation. That's an awesome feature. It's going to put me ahead of the game compared to all the software coming from a CD that might be a little bit out of date. So it's got its updates, and now it's continuing with the installation. It says, do I want to install the Grub bootloader to the master boot record? And I'm going to say absolutely yes, go for it. So I appreciate the confirmation. So it's installing that for us. And now it's saying, okay, the install is complete. It's time to reboot. I want to point out something that happened. Down here, this is the VirtualBox control panel for this device, this virtual machine. And that being grayed out represents that it ejected the CD. So if I was on a live computer, it would have auto-ejected the CD to prepare me for the boot to the actual hard drive. So if everything's in order, which I think it is, we can go ahead and press enter to continue. So it's doing a little bit of cleanup, and once it's done, it'll reboot this system into Kali Linux loaded off of the hard drive. Okay, so from this menu right here, if we use the up and down arrow keys, we can go ahead and pause. It automatically boots in 5 seconds. But if we wanted to, for some reason, interrupt that, we could. And I'm going to just press enter, and this is going to launch this from the hard disk on the system that we just installed. And in our case, that's the VirtualBox hard disk that's logically 20 gigs on this system. So now that it's installed, we can go ahead and simply log in by clicking and saying I want to log in as root. And my password is tour. And we are in. And here, my friend, is Kali Linux. So the menu is at the top now, applications, and if we go to Kali Linux, they've got the top 10 security tools, and then a very similar list to what we experienced in BackTrack. So virtually all the tools we've taken a look at so far are still included in Kali Linux. In this video, we've taken a look at the next generation, if you will, of BackTrack called Kali Linux, some of its features, and how to do a basic install to get it up and running. I've had a fantastic time here with you. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.